Yeah, I asked her to do that one because I hate that piece.
What?
I'm sorry.
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with me was the question that he just asked. How much time do you have?
Hey, we have half an hour now.
We have half an hour, but I think we should talk about other things. Hi, welcome. I'm Robert McBride. This is Carlos Kalmar, music director of the Oregon Symphony.
Hi. Good evening.
He has had quite an interest for a number of years in American music, and for some years also an interest in pieces that won the Pulitzer Prize. And it's so interesting that so many of the works that won the Pulitzer Prize for music then just kind of went away, including the Symphony No. 4 by Howard Hanson that you're bringing us tonight.
Well, I actually was I was thinking about whether I even have an explanation for anything that is going on, and the only explanation that makes any kind of sense is the fact that times move on and they develop, and of course United States is a very large country with an enormous amount of talent. So it has to be said that maybe the focus on our day and age is more on people who are not only alive but have written their music in the 90s, 80s, and 2000s. Doubt that that is entirely true, with a few exceptions. John Adams is, of course, one, rightly so. We should play John Adams, but John Adams is nothing per se new unless he writes a new piece. We cherish and know his music. But in terms of people who actually were very, very popular in the 40s, 50s, 60s, what on earth went on? And then I thought, well, is it maybe because the people who are responsible to putting programs together actually think that the music by all these is just not as good as Beethoven and Brahms, etc. And I thought, well, yeah, I know that. It's true, but that it's, first of all, it's not a competition, and second, it reminded me of one thing. Couple of 3 months ago, I had the pleasure and honor to conduct a subscription here that I was actually not supposed to conduct because Leo Hussein had to drop out, and he had a piece by Jonas Kokkonen, Finnish composer whom I had barely heard mentioning as a composer, and I certainly didn't know his music. And at the end of the day, what I come up with, the piece by Kokkonen, was very interesting. As good as Tchaikovsky or Mozart? No. So, but we played it. And in Finland, which for me is a country where things work very, very well, there is a very strong tradition to actually nurture the composers of their own. So they constantly play, I mean, of course they play Sibelius, but it's pretty much the only one that everybody knows. And then they play a lot of obscure people that we have never heard here in the United States, and we don't know how to pronounce because it's Finnish language anyway. And I have not heard about them, or a few, and it's regular. Since I go with little regularity to Finland, yes, I conduct Finnish composers, of course. And it's interesting. Sometimes the music is better, sometimes it's only moderately interesting, but we do something for the country. And here, I mean, people who were so important, Walter Piston, Howard Hanson, Alan Hovhannes, Paul Creston, where are they? Nowhere. And even this piece you're going to hear tonight won a Pulitzer Prize, the biggest. So in the end, and I know that if you attend these pre-concert talks, you heard me saying this already, at least I have to wonder a little bit about the value of the Pulitzer Prize, because there is a large list of Pulitzer Prize winning pieces, and with the exception of Appalachian Spring, none of them is being played. Not one.
Right.
What's wrong? Are the pieces not good? I don't think so. I think the pieces are very interesting. Actually, Howard Hanson, the piece you're going to hear tonight, very interesting music. And the problem with this piece, and maybe with others that I had the honor of conducting that are on the Pulitzer Prize list, is you have to work a little harder to make them work well.
Why?
Because, excuse me.
He's been sick.
Yeah, sorry, I missed last week. Well, I missed the pre-concert talk. I did the concerts. But anyway, the thing is, there are pieces in music where you just do. I don't know. Probably.
I've got it, just in case.
Thank you. There are pieces where you let, as I always say, you cannot ruin them. I mean,
Oh, let me try.
Well, the thing is, one great example is actually Johann Sebastian Bach, because Johann Sebastian Bach has endured an insane array of interpretations. And of course, there was in the 30s, 40s of last century, there was this romantic tradition of doing Bach. And then came all these very important period instrument specialists who said, no. First of all, orchestras really small, gut strings, old instruments in the wind, small choruses if needed. The speed at which you play is very different. And of course, we owe it very much to those period instrument specialists that even reading the music correctly happened. But the point is that actually you listen to things like the B minor Mass by Johann Sebastian Bach, undoubtedly, yeah, one of those pieces were like, oh, yeah. And you listen to the interpretation of Otto Klemperer, and you have to say, so from the whole historical point of view, wrong, really. He misses a couple of things really by a large mark. But it's a great interpretation, still. And in that sense, adding to maybe my own, which is not such an important interpretation, you can't kill pieces like this. They just work by themselves. Well, now, fast forwarding to pieces that won the Pulitzer Prize, many of them you actually have to work harder, because sometimes what the composer writes is not obvious immediately, like in Bach and Mozart, Beethoven, etc., the likes. And you have to find it. Then very often it happens that you have to balance the orchestra correctly, because the piece is over-instrumentated, there is too much. In this piece you're going to hear an interesting piece. Sometimes in this score there is so much going on that you think, like, you scratch your head and you think, okay, which one is it? Which one do I bring to the fore? Because if I just play what he wrote, which is everybody as loud as they can, it's where is it? That at least that doesn't make sense. So in that sense, you have to work harder, because if you just do what is on this page and don't add a little bit of what could he meant, then the piece is going to be, it's like, okay, fine. But I think at the end, I think the effect of Howard Hanson's number 4, called Requiem, probably written in memory of his father, is quite something. It's first of all, I have conducted other pieces by Hanson, and so I understand Hanson being an American romantic in the language of 20th century, though. But it's an American romantic. And then this piece starts, and it doesn't start like that at all. It's actually fairly like uneasy and kind of rough on the edges, and middle through the first movement he kind of changes completely his idea, and then you are in territory where you think, yeah, that is Hanson. Second movement is entirely Hanson. Third movement is a very fast Dies Irae, which is like the Day of Wrath. The thing is, hey, what do I have to say? It's Dies Irae, meaning Day of Wrath, it's symphonic. It's only an orchestra. And last week we did Verdi Requiem with the most amazing dies irae written in the history of music. Yeah, it's not as damaging, scary as Verdi, but it's good. It's really well done. And then in the last movement, he starts with this sublime melody, and then he goes again into this territory of uneasiness, and you think like, wow, drama. And then at the end, he puts everybody to rest, and the piece is over. And I believe very strongly, otherwise I wouldn't have put it to as one of 3 works that we put out in our new CD. I believe this is really, really good music.
And not only will you hear it tonight, but you can see the forest of microphones from the folks at Sound Mirror recording for the next Oregon Symphony CD, which will be out sometime.
I wish I could tell you more, because actually the former CD that we recorded is still not out, which in part is my fault, because sometimes I'm very slow in editing. But anyway, and so first, probably in the early fall, there will be a CD out there that we recorded 2 and 1 years ago, I think, which is purely American music, but late 20th and early 21st century. And then comes this one, which is middle 20th century.
Thank you for doing all that.
And it's a lot of American music. Yeah. And if I think about all the pieces that we have not done yet, God.
Yeah. And I hope you know that the recordings that are made here with this man, those men and women, and the folks from Sound Mirror are really spectacular. And you can buy them on the table in the lobby. And our violin soloist tonight will be signing his CDs at the table in the lobby after the Brahms Violin Concerto, which is the second half of tonight's concert. And the concert begins with one of those late tone poems by Dvořák. Thank you. We never get to hear these things. And maybe that's partly because the symphonies are so great, it's easy to just do those. And maybe because the stories are so hideous behind them that we don't want to think about that. I mean, decapitated children, really? But they're these Czech folk tales. And like the grim fairy tales, they're grim. What is it with stories like this?
First of all, I have to say, and you know that I have to say things like that, there is no reason why we only play regularly in symphony halls Symphony 7, 8, and 9 by Dvořák. None. And I am shrugging in terms of the gruesome story that you're going to hear. Because, as you know, I'm a German-speaking person. I grew up with Brothers Grimm, and I learned actually this week, because actually I came to a rehearsal and asked my orchestra, do you have here in America like folk tales, fairy tales that you tell your children, like I grew up with Brothers Grimm? And they said, oh yeah, and we even do the Brothers Grimm, but in the watered down version. Everything ends well. And I think like, why?
Kids can take it. They can take the real life. And that's what we can teach them a lot with these tales. And I think that's the motivation behind them.
The motivation behind them is exactly that. And of course, the stories behind the 4 tone poems that Dvořák wrote are not exact. The fairy tales by Grimm are intended for children. And I don't want to get into an argument whether it's a good idea to have your grandmother eaten by a wolf, be that as it may. But the Grimm stories are actually for children, and these are ballads, so it's a poem, and they are not intended for children alone. No. And yes, it's an entire book of ballads by the Czech poet Jaromír Erben, and trust me, one story is more horrific than the other. And it makes actually having your grandmother being eaten by a wolf like, you're like, whatever. this is really bad. And
have you done the other three, or just this Water Goblin?
No, I have done all of it. Oh, yeah.
Well, it's great, Dvořák, and I know you love his music, and so do I. So thanks for bringing this.
Well, this is that is the shocking thing is so I mean, where to start? First of all, it's Dvořák, therefore great talent in the music. Second, in this piece that you're going to hear tonight, he actually manages to construct an entire piece and a description of a tale with a 2-bar motive. It's actually the first 2 bars pretty much give you the entire, and it's repeated obsessively, but it's carried out throughout 19 or 20 minutes that this piece is long, and in very different characterizations. And the good thing about this composition of Dvořák is that you will hear me telling you the tale. If you hear it now, fine, but I will tell it from when I'm standing here. Yeah,
let's save that for now.
I have to tell you,
once.
because just, you know, and that you actually can follow the story exactly, even without a score, and even without reading, oh, now it gets slow, therefore it's the girl with the mother, or what. You'll hear it. It's so highly descriptive music, but with a great sense of structure and depth, and I cannot imagine actually a better piece than this one.
Yay. And then halftime.
Then halftime.
We call them intermissions. The Brits call them intervals. And then the big, beautiful Brahms violin concerto with its incredibly beautiful oboe solo in the second movement, an idea that Samuel Barber borrowed for his later violin concerto, because it works so beautifully. I know you love Brahms. Have you worked with this violinist before?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yes.
In this piece?
No.
Okay.
No, actually, we did one thing in Spain together and immediately loved each other. Then I think the next time was even in Grand Park, where we had absolutely no time to rehearse. It's Grand Park. And then we said, yeah, but next time we actually can dig our teeth into Brahms. And he is a phenomenal violinist, and I love his playing very, very much. Now, the Brahms concerto has its origin probably or maybe not its factual origin, but why it developed the way it developed has something to do with Brahms's youth and early life, because Brahms, who was actually a very interesting character, when he was very young and lived in Hamburg, he had to subsidize himself. He had to earn money by playing the piano. And he played in establishment of doubtful character.
Fair enough.
And the story goes that
he learned a lot as a young man.
Yeah. Anyway, in one of those many venues that he actually was befriended by a violinist, Eduard Reményi. Eduard Reményi in his time was one of the most important Hungarian violinists alive. And years later, Reményi, who definitely recognized the talent of this young man, years later, and Brahms was already established to some extent and in the household of Robert Schumann and Clara Schumann, and all of that happened, Reményi introduced Brahms to Joseph Joachim. Joseph Joachim, the greatest violinist of his time. And it is this friendship that actually cooked up this concerto. Now, the funny thing about this concerto is that the concept of this concerto was 4 movements. It was actually a 4-movement piece. And then Brahms wrote one of these typical Brahmsian letters full of little acid, somewhat humor, or what Brahms thought is humorous. he said, well, those two movements, he wrote to Joachim and said something along the lines of, you know, those two movements were actually my best, but I deleted them. And now I replaced it with a pretty crappy second movement, which is what you're going to hear tonight. Which is, of course, the glory of the concerto, is the second movement is absolutely stunningly amazing. And the collaboration between Brahms and Joachim was so great that Brahms asked Joachim to write the cadenza for the first movement, and that is what is being played everywhere. The cadenza is by Joachim, and Joachim, of course, premiered the piece. Brahms was conducting. Success was not so great, but Joachim was very stubborn. He said, this is a great piece, let's play it. And he always said, in regards to the difficulties of the piece, that yes, the piece makes me sweat a lot, but it's worth it. Good. And ultimately, be that as it may, amongst violinists, I think there is, and even amongst conductors, probably there is an agreement that we have quite an important array of good violin concerti in in the standard repertoire. I mean, Mozart, pretty good pieces, yeah. Tchaikovsky, excellent, etc., etc. There are others. On the top shelf, there are only two. And now you can start a long discussion which one is number one and which one number two. I don't care. It's always Brahms and Beethoven next to each other.
It's interesting that you mentioned Tchaikovsky, because the violin you're going to see and hear tonight is the instrument that Tchaikovsky had in mind when he wrote his violin concerto. It belonged to Leopold Auer, who when he was a teenager studied with Joachim. And it's one of those incredible violins by Stradivarius that continues to be passed down from player to player and to sing beautifully. I find it really interesting with these ancient instruments, how they live so long.
And the interesting point, and I'm not lobbying for something that I recorded, there is one recording of Brahms concerto with me on the podium of Chicago Symphony, with Rachel Barton Pine. The instrument she plays is the instrument Brahms heard.
Wow. What's it like to hold and play these instruments?
If I would hold and play it, it would sound like crap.
Do you ever ask a soloist to do that? May I just hold that instrument? May I touch it?
No.
You don't?
No.
Okay.
No. Why should? No, for me it's...
You're a violinist. How can you resist?
Yeah, but trust me, the temptation is non-existent.
Is that a matter of respect?
It has nothing to do with that, because I think it was Jascha Heifetz that once upon Jascha Heifetz played one of those. I don't know which one, but one of those very old, super duper, hyper, etc. And one, probably a poor fellow in the audience, approached Heifetz and said, "Your violin sounds so amazing." And Heifetz said, "Okay, try." Meaning, yeah, I know it sounds amazing, you need to know how to do it. So in that context, no, I don't want to play the violin, because yes, it's a good violin, and I would feel like it doesn't sound. No. I prefer actually to listen and to see what musicians of the caliber of Vadim what they come up with and what ideas. Because the great thing about pieces like Brahms' Violin Concerto is that every conductor, at least those of a certain age, have done these pieces over and over and over, countless times. And it's nice to have a soloist who then comes like Vadim. Vadim, we met, of course, as always, before the first rehearsal. Vadim said, "I have a few requests." And I said, "Okay, what? What do you want?" And he said, "Can we here do this?" And I said, "Of course we can." And then he just pointed very few things out that, in a way, point to a very interesting problem, which is we have a very stubborn tradition in how we play certain things. And it's very healthy sometimes to ask yourself, now wait a second, why do we have this tradition? Second, what is actually really written there? I'm not saying that you will really realize exactly word by word what is slightly different, but if you hear one note stretch a little bit more than usual, it's because Vadim said he has a request, and I said like, sure.
It's a collaboration. Violinist Vadim Gluzman, I love his name, conductor Carlos Kalmar, the men and women of the Oregon Symphony, and the men of Sound Mirror and all their magic microphones. So the concert recorded for broadcast on All Classical Portland, and part of it for an upcoming CD with the Oregon Symphony. So it's important to make sure your phones are turned off and you don't rattle your programs and drop your handbags. And if you need the cough drop, have one handy. Thanks for being here. I'm Robert McBride. He's Carlos Kalmar, and you're the audience.